Deanna Laney was a mother of 3 young boys living in New Chapel Hill, Texas, a small and religiously conservative community. By all accounts, she seemed like a devoted Christian woman, actively participating in her church, singing in the choir, and raising her children with values rooted in faith. Neighbors and acquaintances described her as polite, gentle, and kind, someone who loved her family and appeared to embody the role of a caring mother. Her household, while modest, was stable, and there were no visible signs of abuse or neglect in the years leading up to the crime. Yet beneath this surface of normalcy, Laney harbored a growing intensity in her religious convictions. Friends later recalled moments when her beliefs seemed extreme, though at the time they did not appear dangerous. She immersed herself in scripture and prayer, often seeking guidance from God for daily decisions. To her community, this reflected piety. But in retrospect, those same habits were interpreted as the beginnings of a dangerous obsession. Her life illustrates how deeply religious devotion, when intertwined with underlying mental illness, can evolve from socially acceptable faith into something catastrophic. The tragedy unfolded on the night of May 10, 2003, Mother's Day weekend. Deanna Laney later testified that she experienced a powerful vision in which she believed God commanded her to sacrifice her children, similar to the biblical story of Abraham and Isaac. Convinced that she was acting out divine will, she carried her sons one by one into the backyard during the night while her husband was asleep inside the house. Her oldest son, 8-year-old Joshua, and her middle son, 6-year-old Luke, were laid down near each other. Deanna used heavy stones from her yard to strike their skulls repeatedly until they died. Her youngest child, 14-month-old Aaron, was also attacked, but he survived the blows despite suffering critical injuries. After the killings, she calmly returned to the house, calling 911 hours later to confess what she had done. The crime shocked not only her local community but the entire nation. The brutality of a mother killing her own children in such a deliberate and ritualistic manner sparked immediate outrage and confusion. For investigators, it was difficult to comprehend her state of mind. Laney herself insisted she had no malice, claiming she was fulfilling God's plan and protecting her children's souls from eternal damnation. This chilling justification made her case stand out among filicide crimes. Psychiatric evaluations revealed that Deanna Laney was suffering from severe psychotic delusions at the time of the murders. Experts diagnosed her with schizoaffective disorder and religious psychosis, noting her history of visions and voices she attributed to God. These episodes were not sudden. Evidence suggested she had experienced hallucinations in the past but had never sought treatment. Religious psychosis occurs when delusions and hallucinations are interpreted through the lens of faith. In Laney's case, scripture became a filter for her mental illness. She believed she was chosen by God for a divine test, and her interpretation of the Abraham story convinced her that killing her children was an act of obedience. Unlike other motives for child killings, such as revenge, neglect, or financial stress, Laney's crime was deeply tied to a distorted religious worldview. Psychologists also pointed out the tragic pattern of maternal filicide in mentally ill mothers. Similar cases throughout history have shown how postpartum psychosis, schizophrenia, and untreated mental illness can lead to mothers harming or killing their children. Laney's case became a disturbing example of how faith, when combined with untreated mental illness, can lead to catastrophic outcomes. The trial of Deanna Laney drew national attention. The prosecution argued that the killings were deliberate acts of violence, pointing out that she had the physical and mental capacity to plan and execute the crime. They described the murders as intentional and heinous, demanding accountability despite her claims of divine instruction. The defense, however, centered their strategy on Laney's mental illness. They presented psychiatric testimony confirming her psychosis, emphasizing that she believed she was following God's command. To the defense, Laney did not act out of cruelty but from delusion. The case became a direct confrontation between legal responsibility and psychiatric diagnosis. Media coverage intensified the public debate. Many struggled with the question, should a mother who kills her children under the influence of psychosis be punished as a criminal, or treated as a patient? Some saw her as a monster, others viewed her as a tragic figure failed by mental health systems. The trial highlighted the tension between religious freedom, legal justice, and mental health care. After weeks of testimony, the jury reached a verdict: Deanna Laney was found not guilty by reason of insanity. Rather than serving a prison sentence, she was committed to a state psychiatric facility in Texas, where she would remain under treatment and supervision. The decision was met with mixed reactions. Some felt justice had not been served for Joshua and Luke, while others believed institutionalization was the only fair outcome given her psychosis. Laney's case ignited ongoing debates about the intersection of faith, law, and mental health. Could deep religious belief mask symptoms of severe mental illness until it was too late? Should the justice system prioritize punishment or treatment in such cases? Her story remains a haunting reminder of the fragility of mental health, and the devastating consequences when delusion, faith, and motherhood collide. For Deanna Laney, the case ended not in prison, but in lifelong psychiatric care, yet for her surviving child and community, the scars of that night continue. The Brandy Lee Rose Devine case is a grim reminder of how substance abuse, poverty, and unstable personal relationships can spiral into tragedy. Brandy was a young woman who grew up facing significant hardship, marked by financial struggles, unhealthy relationships, and a long battle with drug addiction. Her life was characterized by instability, both emotionally and economically, leaving her ill-equipped to provide a safe environment for her children. Friends and neighbors described her as distant, often overwhelmed, and trapped in cycles of dependency that left her disconnected from her role as a mother. The combination of poverty and addiction eroded her ability to care for her family, and despite moments of apparent affection, her children lived in a setting defined by neglect and insecurity. To many who knew her, Brandy was not an evil person, but someone who had lost her way under the crushing weight of personal demons, a background that would later serve as context for an unthinkable act. In the period leading up to the crime, Brandy's drug use intensified, and the home environment became increasingly unstable. Substance abuse clouded her judgment and deepened the neglect her children experienced. Arguments with partners and ongoing domestic disputes created a chaotic atmosphere, one in which the children were frequently left vulnerable and unprotected. The strains of daily life, poverty, drug dependence, and personal conflict, culminated in a household where violence and instability became the norm. According to investigators and court testimony, Brandy's decision to take the lives of her children was not a spontaneous outburst but the culmination of weeks, if not months, of escalating tension. On the night of the murders, she was reportedly under the influence, her mind consumed by distorted thoughts and overwhelming stress. Instead of seeking help, she lashed out in the most destructive way possible, killing the very children she was meant to protect. These events revealed not only the devastating power of addiction but also the failure of the systems and people around her to intervene before the situation reached a fatal breaking point. The discovery of the crime shook the community to its core. Neighbors who had long worried about the children's welfare were horrified when the police arrived and the truth became clear. Officers responded to the scene after a concerned call, and what they found confirmed their worst fears: Brandy's children had become the victims of violence at the hands of their own mother. Evidence collected from the scene suggested neglect, substance abuse, and the presence of drugs in the household. The surviving details of the investigation painted a picture of a woman overcome by her addictions and a home environment marked by dysfunction. Community members expressed shock, sadness, and anger, as many had suspected the children were in danger but did not anticipate such a violent outcome. The case quickly gained media attention, raising questions about how warning signs could have been missed, and whether Child Protective Services could have intervened earlier to prevent such a tragedy. In court, the prosecution emphasized the deliberate nature of the crime. They argued that Brandy's drug use did not absolve her of responsibility, highlighting the fact that she consciously chose actions that led to the death of her children. According to the state, this was not an accident, but a violent decision made by someone unwilling to confront her addiction. The defense, on the other hand, focused on Brandy's troubled past. They portrayed her as a victim of her circumstances, an addict overwhelmed by poverty, toxic relationships, and mental health struggles. The defense tried to create sympathy by stressing that she had little support and was consumed by dependency. While this context added complexity to her actions, it did not erase the gravity of her crime. The courtroom atmosphere was tense, with emotional testimony from family members and witnesses. The trial became not just about Brandy's guilt, which was never in doubt, but about how society should respond to crimes rooted in addiction and neglect. Ultimately, the jury returned a guilty verdict, and Brandy Lee Rose Devine was sentenced to life in prison. For many, the sentence represented justice for the children who lost their lives, but it also symbolized the profound consequences of addiction and systemic failure. The case had a lasting impact on discussions about child welfare, highlighting how drug abuse among parents can place children in extreme danger. Advocates argued that stronger intervention strategies, better access to treatment, and improved social support systems might prevent similar tragedies in the future. Brandy's story remains one of heartbreak and warning, a demonstration of how untreated addiction, left to fester in an environment of poverty and instability, can destroy not just one life, but an entire family. For her community and for child protection agencies, the case continues to serve as a reminder of the urgency of recognizing warning signs before it is too late. Jessica Dutro's life in Oregon was marked by instability, hardship, and an atmosphere of tension that filtered down to her children. She lived with her partner and her young family in a modest home, but behind closed doors the environment was anything but nurturing. Accounts later revealed that the household was often filled with conflict, neglect, and strict discipline that crossed the line into abuse. Jessica herself was described by acquaintances as short-tempered, controlling, and prone to lashing out at her children. Early warning signs of mistreatment were evident in the way the children appeared withdrawn, fearful, and hesitant in social settings. Teachers, neighbors, and relatives later testified that the children often seemed dirty, hungry, or emotionally detached, yet no formal protective intervention was made in time to prevent tragedy. Despite these signals, the family slipped under the radar of child welfare services, a failure that left the children trapped in an environment of fear. To the outside world, Jessica was a struggling mother coping with financial stress and multiple children, someone who appeared to be weighed down by poverty and responsibility. Within the household, however, a darker reality existed, a toxic environment where anger, control, and prejudice determined the children's daily lives. The most tragic victim of this abusive environment was Jessica's 4-year-old son, Zachary. The boy suffered repeated physical abuse and neglect that culminated in his untimely death in August 2012. Investigators later revealed that Jessica singled Zachary out for harsher treatment compared to her other children. One chilling detail that emerged was her belief that Zachary might be gay, a suspicion she viewed with hostility rather than compassion. This prejudice fueled her violent discipline, as she attempted to toughen him up through beatings, humiliation, and neglect. Instead of nurturing his sensitivity, she interpreted his personality as weakness and targeted him with cruelty. On the day of his death, Zachary was subjected to severe abuse that caused fatal internal injuries. He was left untreated despite obvious signs of distress, including vomiting, lethargy, and difficulty breathing. By the time emergency responders were called, it was too late to save him. The motive linked to her suspicion of his sexuality shocked the public, adding a disturbing layer of prejudice and bias to the already horrifying crime. It was not simply a case of neglect or uncontrolled anger, it was targeted cruelty based on an unfounded belief about her child's identity, making the crime both an act of domestic abuse and a manifestation of deep-seated intolerance. The investigation into Zachary's death uncovered devastating evidence that pieced together a long-standing pattern of abuse. Medical examiners determined that his injuries were consistent with prolonged trauma, not a one-time incident. Autopsy results revealed blunt force trauma to his abdomen and other parts of his body, internal bleeding, and signs of repeated violence, proving that his suffering had been ongoing for weeks or months. Detectives also recovered digital evidence that painted a damning picture of Jessica's mindset. Text messages between her and her partner revealed her frustration with Zachary, her descriptions of him as different, and her insistence that he required harsher discipline than the other children. In one message, she vented that she thought he would grow up to be gay and expressed her determination to stop that from happening, a line of thinking that prosecutors would later emphasize as proof of prejudice. These messages were used to demonstrate her deliberate intent and bias, showing that the abuse was not accidental but part of a calculated pattern of targeted mistreatment. Witnesses, including family members and acquaintances, testified about the harsh environment in the home, describing how Jessica's children often looked afraid and avoided eye contact with adults. Social workers, though criticized for not intervening sooner, also contributed to the narrative by confirming that signs of abuse were present but overlooked. Together, the forensic findings, electronic evidence, and witness accounts created a comprehensive case against Jessica, leaving little doubt about her responsibility in her son's death. During the trial, the prosecution emphasized the deliberate and cruel nature of Jessica Dutro's actions. They presented the autopsy results and text messages as proof that she had intentionally abused Zachary, motivated not only by stress but also by personal bias against him. The prosecutors argued that she had systematically deprived him of care, ignored his suffering, and ultimately allowed him to die without seeking medical help. They painted a picture of a mother who failed in the most fundamental duty of care, allowing prejudice and anger to dictate her treatment of a vulnerable child. They stressed that this was not a case of parental frustration gone too far but one of sustained violence rooted in hostility. The defense, on the other hand, attempted to contextualize her behavior within the pressures of poverty and personal hardship. They suggested that financial strain, a difficult relationship with her partner, and the overwhelming responsibility of raising multiple children contributed to her instability and clouded her judgment. They tried to redirect blame toward circumstance, arguing that her drug use, poverty, and psychological stress created an environment where she made devastating mistakes. While this narrative may have explained aspects of her instability, it could not mitigate the evidence of intentional cruelty. The courtroom atmosphere was charged with emotion as the suffering of Zachary was detailed, leaving jurors with little room for sympathy toward the defendant. Family members wept as photographs of the child were shown, and jurors listened in silence to the clinical yet heartbreaking testimony of doctors who explained his injuries. In the end, the jury delivered a guilty verdict, sentencing Jessica Dutro to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years, along with an additional 32 years for related charges of assault and mistreatment of her other children. The outcome reflected the seriousness of her crimes and the recognition that prejudice and cruelty played central roles in her son's death. Beyond the courtroom, the case had broader implications that extended far beyond Oregon. It forced society to confront uncomfortable truths about child abuse, the impact of parental bias, and the dangers of homophobia when directed toward vulnerable children. Advocates for child protection pointed to the case as a call to action for stronger oversight, earlier intervention in at-risk households, and more aggressive monitoring when children show signs of fear or injury. Others emphasized the importance of addressing prejudice, noting that the idea of targeting a child for suspected sexuality revealed a unique and disturbing aspect of abuse. Media coverage amplified these concerns, framing the story not just as a case of maternal violence but as a cultural warning about how intolerance can infect family dynamics with lethal results. For many, Jessica Dutro's conviction was not just justice for Zachary but also a sobering reminder of how prejudice, untreated stress, and unchecked violence can culminate in tragedy. The case ended with her imprisonment, but the lessons it carries about the intersection of bias, child welfare, and parental responsibility continue to resonate as one of the most disturbing examples of targeted child abuse in modern times.